Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dario Health. Manage your blood glucose levels, increase your possibilities. By Gvoke HypoPen, the first premixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, with the Summer Olympics underway and swimming taking center stage this week, I caught up with gold medalist Gary Hall Jr., the very first person with T1D to take gold. He talks about what's changed since then.
I rely heavily on the convenience of the CGM. I mean, being able to see where my levels are trending. In order for me to compete at the Olympic levels and do the necessary training, I was manually testing with finger sticks 20 times a day.
When Gary was diagnosed in 1999, he was told he'd never swim competitively again. We talk about how he got past that and what he's telling families today. And Benny is home, my son, after a month abroad. I'll have a little bit of an update on how it went. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. My son Benny was diagnosed right before he turned 2 back in 2006. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting. That's how you get the podcast. And one of the fun things about going to diabetes conferences is that you don't know who you're going to run into. And it turns out that just a few weeks before the postponed Summer Olympics were to start, there was an Olympic gold medal swimmer at the recent Friends for Life conference. So great to be able to go back in person, finally kind of feeling our way through this and hoping that, we'll see what happens for the rest of this year, but hoping that we can get back to it. But once I saw that Gary Hall Jr. was speaking to families attending Friends for Life for the first time, I knew I had to ask him to be on the show. So he graciously agreed. He met me just a few hours later. We did this interview in person. You will hear me during the interview refer to how far he had to walk, and I mean it. This conference center is huge, and I appreciate him basically meeting me at the farthest point from where he was. And you'll also likely hear some background noise or some music. If you are not familiar, Gary Hall Jr. represented the United States at swimming in 1996, in 2000, and 2004. It's really quite a family legacy. His father, his grandfather, and his uncle all competed on the U.S. Olympic swim team. Hall won silver in 96, and then he was diagnosed in 1999 with type 1. His doctors told him he would never swim again competitively. But then in 2000, in Sydney, he became the fastest swimmer in the world. He broke his own record in 2004, and by the time he retired from competitive swimming in 2008, he had won 10 Olympic medals, including 5 gold. In these current Olympics, there is a competitor from the U.S. with type 1, Charlotte Drury. She's not a swimmer. She's a trampoline gymnast. And I talked about her during In the News last week, our last episode. I hope to have her on the show in the near future. I'm really interested to hear the difference because it's only been, a little bit more than 20 years since Gary Hall Jr. was diagnosed and told, no way, drop out of the Olympics, you'll never do it. And Charlotte Drury was diagnosed and 3 weeks later returned to her full training. She was diagnosed this year. She was diagnosed right before the trials. So it's a completely different world in these 22 years, let's say, in between those diagnoses. So I'm really interested to kind of talk to her in the near future, hopefully. All right, so let's get to it. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. And when you have diabetes and use insulin, low blood sugar can happen when you don't expect it. That's why most of us carry fast-acting sugar, and in the case of very low blood sugar, why we carry emergency glucagon. There's a new option called Gvoke HypoPen, the first auto-injector to treat very low blood sugar. Gvoke HypoPen is pre-mixed and ready to go with no visible needle. In usability studies, 99% of people were able to give Gvoke correctly. Find out more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Gary, thank you so much for walking the length of the convention center to talk to me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm getting my steps in today. I'm feeling really good about it. And I'm also having a lot of fun.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. You spoke to the first-timer families this morning, people who are experiencing their first time to Friends for Life. Why was it important for you to speak to them? What were you talking to them about?
The antiquated expression is shell-shocked. Now I think it's PTSD, but when you go through a diagnosis, it hits you hard. It hits your family members and loved ones really hard. And you have a lot more questions than answers. And desperate is a word that comes to mind when reflecting back on my own diagnosis. What makes this such a great convention, such a great organization, Friends for Life and Children with Diabetes, and everybody that attends, is that sense of community here, that we're not in this alone, that there are others out there living and dealing with this condition in a similar way, that understand your struggles. And that's really all we want in some ways, is just to be understood, in such an emotional, traumatic time and experience. And so for first-timers, many of them newly diagnosed or the parent of a newly diagnosed child, it means a lot to me because I haven't forgotten what it's like in that short time after a diagnosis. And to be able to offer some support and encouragement and hopefully hope to those makes me feel really happy.
But when you were diagnosed, there was no one to lead you through it. There had been no one with your experience or the experience you wanted to have. And you have very famously shared, what a difficult time that was and how emotionally low it brought you. I don't mean to take you through the whole thing, but I'd be curious to know where you found inspiration. How did you get through that time when they said, sorry, kid, you're done?
Yeah. It took time. There are stages of grief, and I waded my way through that muck and found, in some ways, fortunate that I was a top-level swimmer, prior to the diagnosis, because I had people reaching out to me. This is unusual. That's not the norm. And so I was able to very early connect with JDRF Children's Congress and Children with Diabetes. I was here in 2000 when this was a new thing.
I'm going to ask you about that. I heard there was some swimming, some kids. And,
some
handstands in the pool.
You can count on that when it's here at the Coronado Springs Resort in Disneyland World. Lots of swimming, lots of smiles. Good memories.
I bet. But, not to dwell on the difficult, but it's wonderful that they reached out to you, right? And that is an unusual experience. But you still had to find a way to say to yourself, my dream's still going to happen.
Yeah, there was no certainty in that pursuit. I didn't know what was possible. But this is life, right? Like, we don't know what we're capable of until we put ourselves out there. And I was willing to try and was really fortunate to connect with Dr. Ann Peters. And Ann has been here in the past and spoken to so many people, and she's great. I love her. I love Ann Peters. She was the inspiration, and it only came in the way of, let's give it a try. It was that was such a departure from these other doctors that I had initially come in contact with. That, if you set your mind to something and try to figure it out, you're going to have some success eventually. So that's what we kind of set to work doing. And like I said, there was no certainty that I would be the fastest swimmer in the world one day. But that's what happened.
Yeah. When you look back at that time and you think about how you manage diabetes now, what's changed for you?
The game changer in diabetes management was the continuous glucose monitoring device. And Dexcom came out with that device. It just changed with diabetes management. And it was just almost like, how come I couldn't have had this 20 years earlier? I guess it wasn't that long but 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
I rely heavily on, the convenience of the CGM, I mean, being able to see where my levels are trending. In order for me to compete at the Olympic levels and do the necessary training, I was manually testing with finger sticks 20 times a day. And that doesn't even come close to comparing to, what the Dexcom has to offer. Yeah, that's been the biggest changer. In 2000, I was diagnosed in 99, last century.
Turn of the century.
The pumps were really just becoming popularized at that time. And I like pumps. A lot of people swear by them and love them, but it was just, I never felt connected. That's the first time I've ever used that pun. I just caught myself. Anyway, I just never, the attachment, and maybe it was because I was a swimmer and in and out of the water and just wearing, Skippy Speedo or whatever, body conscious, I don't know. But I was able to get over that with wearing the CGM and a discreet behind the Speedo location backside.
We get a little personal on the show sometimes, no worries.
So, but the benefits to me were worth a wearable. Yeah, I love what the pump companies were doing, but at the time, 2000, everybody was, it was parading in the convention halls, the pumpers, it was this big movement and game changer and, how diabetes is managed. But I found after trying all the pumps that, I was getting this good, range as long as I was, the testing was the key, and as long as I was willing to give myself a shot, pen needles are pretty easy to take. It's just personal preference.
I just want to ask you about the 20 finger sticks a day, because I remember my son went 7 years without a CGM, and it was, especially in the pool, those pruny fingers, it's really hard to do finger sticks. Was that an issue for you? I mean, do you have memories of like, oh, not this one. Oh, I'll try this finger. I mean, it must have been slipping around on the pool in the wet test strips. Right back to Gary answering that question. But first, one of the things that makes diabetes management difficult for us, that really annoys me and Benny, isn't actually the big picture stuff. It's the little tasks all adding up. Are you sick of running out of strips? Do you need some direction or encouragement going forward with your diabetes management? Would visibility into your trends help you on your wellness journey? The Dario Diabetes Success Plan offers all of that and more. No more waiting in line at the pharmacy. No more searching online for answers. No more wondering about how you're doing with your blood sugar levels. Find out more. Go to mydario.com/diabetes-connections. Now back to Gary answering my question about what it's like checking your blood sugar while you're swimming.
So yes, drying off properly is very important. There are times where, there's just watery blood going into the thing. It was juggling, and a lot more to carry in a pocket. I like to travel light, empty pockets. So now I've got my smartphone and a pen. And so I appreciate probably that more than anything because I bulky pockets. They slow you down.
And my listeners will definitely want to know if you have any tips and tricks keeping that Dexcom on in the water. Everybody's got a different method because everybody's skin is different. I'll give you that disclaimer first. Yeah. Any advice or anything to share?
Yeah, I know. I use duct tape.
All right, I need to just narrate. He looked around almost ashamedly.
Yeah, I know. I'm just hardcore that way. I guess. I'm sorry. I kind of like the roughness of it. So, when it needs securing, I get out that silver duct tape.
I'm almost sorry I asked. You're meeting kids here. You're talking to parents. This is a family conference. There are a lot of adults with type 1 as well. But I remember when my son was first diagnosed, anybody that looked like they were living well with type 1, I would just grab, how did you do it? What did you do? What's the key? And I know there's not really an answer for that. But I'm curious what you say, because I'm sure parents have already asked you.
What do you have to do to stay healthy?
Well, I think it goes beyond that. I'll change my question. Beyond keeping your blood sugar in control and listening to your mom, right, and doing everything you're supposed to do, yes,
always.
I'm curious if there's more to it, because for me, I find that my son thrives the best when he's allowed to take risks. He knows that we trust him, and even if he messes up, hopefully it's in a safe enough environment. He's 16 now, just for context. So we're giving him longer and longer rope. And I think that's important for thriving with diabetes, is letting your kids make mistakes, letting yourself make mistakes. I'm curious if anything like that kind of helped you. I mean, you're somebody who had such high goals that had to have helped you thrive as well.
Well, I've got children. My daughter is 15. My son is 13 now. And they don't have diabetes, knocking on wood. And they're at an age where I remember from my childhood, independence is an important thing. And as a parent, you want to protect them, you want to shelter them, right? And even more so when your child has diabetes. We have to let them go. They have to leave the nest at some point and develop that sense of independence. And so that's difficult for a lot of parents here, especially newly diagnosed, that really have that instinct to protect and shepherd. And so then there may be some mess-ups, and a learning curve, a trial and error process. There's error involved, and there certainly was in my learning curve in diabetes management. Eventually, you get through that, and they're able to take some ownership of it. And I think for me, I've always had a fierce sense of independence, and so that was really important for me, not just in my pursuits in the pool, but also in diabetes management.
Summer Olympics are coming up. What can we look for? Like, can you tell us anything we should be watching behind the scenes, or stuff we don't know, or fun stuff about swimming? I mean, you made such a show of it.
Well, sport is entertainment, so don't fault me for entertaining. I had some fun. That's all I was doing, just horsing around. But for Lookout, I went to the Olympic trials for USA Swimming. They were in Omaha, Nebraska, just a couple weeks ago, and saw the team qualify. And what an intense meet that is. They take first place and second place. Third place goes home. I was able to see some outstanding swims. I'm a fan of the sport. I've been following it closely my entire life. And the next guy, because there's certainly been a lot made of, Michael Phelps, his retirement. He's been a pillar of USA Swimming for so long, who's going to replace that pillar. Caleb Dressel is the guy. And everybody will know his name after these Olympics. He's really just a phenomenal swimmer, a great role model. I expect good things out of him. On the women's side, Katie Ledecky, she was around in the last Olympics. She is a sweetheart. She's a darling. She's exactly who you want your daughter to grow up to be. So Team USA is in good hands. There's a lot of swimmers with them. Shoulder to shoulder, representing the United States. And we can count on them to do a great job and represent us really well.
And then just one last question before I let you go. Kids listening, families listening with type 1 who want to swim, high school level, college level, maybe dreaming about the Olympics. Any advice for them? I guess I'll be fishing here a little bit, but feel free to get specific. Obviously, you want them to follow their dreams.
Yeah. Listen, I say it often. You don't have to win an Olympic gold medal to enjoy the benefits of sport, that there is social camaraderie that's built and a support system, and you surround yourself with other young, ambitious people that have goals and work hard to chase them down. And, this isn't exclusive to swimming. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I think it's the greatest sport in the world. It is. But, we'll accept the benefits of other sports in addition to. I love sport. I love what it teaches. The data is overwhelming. Kids that are involved in a sports program, on a sports team, average, they outperform their classmates by one full grade in the classroom. What it does in stress reduction and overall health benefit is tremendous. If there was a single drug that had the efficacy of exercise and provided the same benefits of exercise, every single doctor in the world would prescribe that. It doesn't have to be swimming, it doesn't have to be for a gold medal, but go out and have some fun.
Gary, thank you so much for talking to me.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
Lots more information about Gary in the show notes at diabetes-connections.com or wherever you're listening. Most podcast players will let you access the notes, but I do put a transcript in now to every episode, and that can get a little bit long. So if you don't like the way it looks in whatever player you're listening to, just head on back to diabetes-connections.com and click on the episode homepage. And I'll be honest with you, I don't usually share this kind of stuff, but I kind of wish I'd prepared a little bit better. I mean, I didn't realize I was talking to Gary until I talked to Gary, right? I met him there and he said, sure, I'll come on. And then we did the interview. And he has so many other things I wish I had asked about. He punched a shark. I guess he was in the middle of a shark attack. The shark was attacking his sister and he punched the shark. I mean, this is a crazy story. His sister's okay. And he's also been very outspoken about doping during the Olympics. I'd like to talk to him again. Maybe we'll be able to do an Olympic roundtable one of these days with the other athletes who have competed. But he was very gracious to talk to me and to make the schlep all the way down the hallway to where I was. And you're laughing. It probably takes a good 15 minutes to get where I was in the conference center there at the beautiful Coronado Springs Resort at Walt Disney World. That's where they have the Friends for Life conference every year in July. All right, up next, Benny is home. Many of you know that I haven't really felt like I could breathe for the month that he was overseas. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we handled that. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when we first started with Dexcom back in December of 2013, the share and follow apps were not an option. They hadn't come out with the technology yet. So trust me when I say using the share and follow apps makes a big difference. I think it's really important to talk to the person you're following or sharing with, get comfortable with how you want everybody to use the system. Even if you're following your young child, these are great conversations to have. What numbers will you text? How long will you wait to call? That sort of thing. That way, the whole system gives everyone real peace of mind. I'll tell you what I absolutely love about Dexcom Share, and that's helping Benny with any BG issues using the data from the whole day and night, not just one moment. Internet connectivity is required to access separate Dexcom Follow app. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. All right, so Benny is home. As I am taping this episode, he's been home for just 2 days. Now, we grabbed him from the airport here in Charlotte and hugged him. I did not want to let him go. It was so nice to see him. So just real quick, if you aren't familiar, Benny is 16. He's been going to a non-diabetes sleepaway camp for a month since he was 9 years old. And it is with this camp that he just went to Israel. And he was gone for a little bit more than a month. So how did we do it? How did we let him go with a non-diabetes crew of people overseas for all that time? I'm going to do an episode hopefully with Benny soon. I want to get his take on this. But I'll just give you an overview basically of what we planned and how it went. So the main thing to know is that Benny has been doing this for a long time. When he goes to this camp, as I said, 1 month since he was 9 years old, we do not use Share. We don't use Dexcom. I am not a part of his day-to-day diabetes care. So I think that's the first big thing to know, and also the first big thing that went into really making sure that he knew what he was doing. He's proved time and time again that he could do this. It's never perfect. I should probably have led with that. We don't expect perfect blood glucose lines and numbers when he's at camp. That's not part of our expectation, which I think helps a lot. And I am used to not really knowing what's going on for an entire month. Now, certainly we check in with the medical staff, and especially when he was younger, we would have phone calls, and we did a lot of prep. And we did a lot of prep here. So we made sure that the staff knew what was going on, that he had diabetes, that he will beep, that he will need a little bit more help probably in certain situations, that they had to make sure to store things correctly, not just the insulin, but storing all of the extra diabetes supplies. You don't want Dexcoms and pump insets. You know, when you're schlepping across the Negev desert, you really don't want those in your backpack. So where would we keep them that they would stay cool? You know, that kind of thing. We decided to set up several different profiles in his pump. He uses the Tandem X2 with Control IQ, which was frankly a very big help on this trip. But we set up a few different profiles, the regular profile, a 15% less insulin profile, and a 30% less insulin profile. And we named them that 15% less, 30% less. Make it really easy for him to adjust as he got there, because there were some times when they were incredibly active, you know, lots of hiking, lots of moving around, lots of heat. We decided in advance, we had a lot of conversations about this, that a staff member would follow his Dexcom. I will debrief Benny more about how this actually went, but my understanding is that the counselor, who he's known for years, followed his numbers, but only had the urgent low alert on his phone. So, he wasn't getting beeps all day long. And that seemed to have worked out very well. I also followed. I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to. Like I said, I don't usually follow him when he's away for that month at camp. But we decided in this circumstance it would be a good idea. But I had to have a plan. So Benny and I talked about, what do I do, right? What am I supposed to do from North Carolina if he's beeping in Tel Aviv? So we decided that if he was low for a certain amount of time, if he was high for a certain amount of time, I would text Benny. And if I didn't get an answer, then I had a system set up in place where, okay, I would call the counselor who was following him. No answer. I would call the counselor and staff who was in Israel. No answer. I would call the staff in New York. And we would go through that. I never had a moment during the month where I had to call anybody or text anybody but Benny. And I only did that, and we'll talk about it in the episode that we do together. There were a couple of times where he was not low, but it was alerting, urgent low for longer than I would have been happy with. So that's why, when he's low for that amount of time, I texted him. He said, it's fine. We resolved it. That's about it. I mean, what other prep did we do? The prep that we've been doing since he was 2 years old. My philosophy is trying to get him as independent and as confident as I can with diabetes. Although I got to be honest with you, that has come back to bite me because I did not expect him to be this independent at 16. And I was frankly very worried all month, but he did great. He really did. It's a lot to shoulder. It's a lot to shoulder at any age with diabetes, right? At any time. But this in particular was a big challenge for him. I'm really proud of him and I can't wait to hear, although if you know Benny, if you've listened for a long time, I'm also kind of dreading hearing some of what he has to say, but we'll be honest with you and we'll share it all. So hopefully that'll happen in the next month. I'll have him on the show to talk about his trip, but he is home. He did really well and he's excited to be sleeping in his own bed. All right, before I let you go, we are traveling a lot in the next couple of weeks, just some family stuff. And I'm going to be at a podcast conference going to Nashville for Podcast Movement. So I don't think we're going to have any schedule interruptions. I've got it planned out pretty well, but hey, you never know. Please join Diabetes Connections, the group, to stay up to date. When stuff happens, I post there first, so you will know what's going on. But I think we're smooth sailing in terms of shows. We were talking to the folks from Afrezza, and I've got an Omnipod update, lots of information about what's in front of the FDA right now. Man, I hope that stuff gets approved soon, but we shall see. And then we're going to be back to school here in the middle of August. Middle of August for my daughter, goes back to college. End of August for Benny. And COVID and Delta variant permitting, I'm really hoping to get back to some in-person activity on the local level and the national level. So fingers crossed, we shall see. Thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back in a couple of days with In the News. Join me for the top stories in the diabetes community. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.